what's the lowest pressure thing that I can come up with? Probably not talking to girls, because
That's a
too much.
threat level
Yes,
10.
yes. But if I see like a guy with cool shoes, I'd be like, "Hey man, cool shoes." I'll start there, and I'll get to a point where like saying cool shoes to a guy, easy, right? And that's what I did. Then I'm like, okay, well, and then I'm gonna start asking them where did they buy them, right?
Yeah.
And literally just like that, just like came up with little games for myself to the point where it became less and less and less and less scary to talk and meet with people. And actually, one of these like, hey man, cool shoes guys was one of my classmates who's now one of my best friends. That was one of the big like aha moments in my life, is that you can train yourself. Like people can change. It's all about like structuring little stepping stones.
This is the Ruby Hour. We're breaking into the vault of today's most brilliant minds to extract raw, actionable insights. This show is produced by Ruby Riot Creatives, the Austin, Texas video content marketing mavericks who help B2B and B2C businesses dominate through unparalleled strategic creativity. Chief Cat Herder Shelby Ring is your host. Claws out. Get ready to shred. Welcome to the rebellion.
Oleg, I am so glad to have you in my little baby studio here. Thanks for making time today.
Honestly, I'm a little scared.
Yeah, oh my God, everybody is. It's cool.
Thank you. Quite the setup. It's awesome.
I always love to give context of who are you in my life. We met at a particular exclusive group that shall not be named. Oh, pretty much met at Fight Club. We're not going to talk about it. You have lived quite the life. So, lived in 4 different countries. You've changed careers 3 times. You have had 2 marriages, and you have hand delivered 1 baby. Your baby.
Yes, by accident. Yes.
So good.
Yes.
So I was like, if there's any good stories, I feel like you have some. So what are the 4 countries that you've lived in?
Yeah. So one, I guess I was born in, so it doesn't really count, but I grew up in the Soviet Union.
Okay.
And in the part of the Soviet Union called Moldova. It's right between Ukraine and Romania. So years, up until like 2, 3 years ago, nobody knew what Moldova was. Now many people know because of the geopolitics around that area. We moved to the U.S. or immigrated to the U.S. when I was 9. So spent a lot of time in San Francisco. Then for grad school, I ran away to Glasgow, to Scotland. So lived there for 2 years. Then at one point I moved to France, to Paris for a year. And of course, the U.S. So,
oh my gosh.
Yeah.
That's not just like lateral, like, oh, I went from the U.S. to Canada, then I spent time. It's like these are different pockets of the world.
Yeah, and usually involves some kind of event in my life. So actually, all my tattoos represent like geographical regions. I have a bunch of tattoos of like places that I've lived and had a big impact on my life. So it's always been like every time I move, there's always something else happening.
Ooh, give me an example of one of the something else's that has happened.
Well, Paris, the most recent example. It's actually a funny story. So like 2016, I was in Paris as a tourist, just sitting in a restaurant in the 9th district, which is my favorite area of Paris. And next table over was an American couple that were locals, like that were living there. And I started chatting with them. Hey, like, what do you do? Blah, 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 blah. And then later that evening, I'm like, oh my God, it would be so amazing to just like move and live in Paris. But like, I don't know how that could ever happen because I have this job, but I'm married and like, she doesn't want to move. Like it just, I don't see it working out. Then 2 years later, my ex-wife and I, one Sunday, we just sat down and we were like, where's this relationship going? And we had a real heart to heart and we realized, you know what? We're awesome friends. but we're not on the same page anymore when it comes to like a marriage. So I was like, so are you saying you want a divorce? She was like, yeah. She's like, but I don't like paperwork. So you just do all the paperwork and I'll sign whatever you tell me to sign because I trust you. Because we were just like, we were not in like a bad place. It was just like one of those things where we got married young,
Yeah.
turns out we have different goals, different aspirations, whatever, right? So I did all the paperwork. We didn't use any lawyers. It was like actually in California where we did this, you have to have a third party serve the other person. It's like very official.
Yes.
So we met in the bar. One of our friends served her, and then we all had shots together and took pictures. And it
That is
just,
the most beautiful divorce story I've ever heard.
yeah. So we're still like, not super close, but we communicate and whatever. So anyway, it's 2018. I had just, we just separated, and one of my buddies calls me. We used to work together, and he lives in Paris. He's French, and he's like, "Hey, you're always talking about, coming to Europe again. I can get you an interview at one of the top startups in Paris. They need an American product manager." I'm like, "Sure. I have no apartment. I have nothing. Like this, if not now, when?"
Yeah, this is the moment.
And then like less than 3 months later, I'm sitting in that same restaurant, except now I have a apartment like 5-minute walk away, and I'm like, holy shit, like I'm doing it, right? Like, and that's happened, like these kind of like accidental, semi-accidental, semi-planned, semi-not planned things have happened to me so many times in my life, where it turns into like a fun story, and yeah.
How did it hit you when you were in that restaurant the next time?
It's like you have this thing that you want, and you don't necessarily know how it's going to get there. But if it seems like if you, at least for me, this is a bit how it's been in my life. I'm very like goal oriented and very structured in my planning and stuff like that. But these kind of long term things, sometimes opportunities create themselves. You don't know why it happened, by chance, by luck, by whatever happenstance, and you're just like, okay, do I take this? Do I not take this? I'll take it. And actually, it's funny because I had to take a 50% pay cut to do this Paris thing. But then in my mind, I was like, okay, when else am I going to get to do this? And who knows what's going to happen? Like it's at the very least, it's going to be an awesome story.
Just full saying
yes.
yes.
So like a lot of times in my life, I sometimes do like things that on the surface would seem irrational, but in my mind, I'm like, okay, like it's gonna be an interesting opportunity, and let's see what happens. I can always go back. Yeah.
So you went from life was moving in a linear fashion. You had a huge disruption of recognizing you and your marriage, you were going in two different directions, and then the opportunity presented itself to move across the world to a different country, take a 50% pay cut, and you said yes just in the hope of let's see what comes from this. Can you look at other seasons of your life and see how you made decisions? Was it in the same energy?
Yes. Well, kind of how I ended up in Glasgow. I was in law school in the U.S., and I ended up in the law school for a stupid reason.
Wait, what was the stupid reason?
So, my undergrad, I graduated in finance.
Okay.
And my first job out of college was for Wells Fargo Investments, working the branch, selling bank products and selling investment products. And I was just like, I shouldn't have been there because I was not confident in myself. I was not confident in what I was selling. So I was just like a terrible salesperson. But I was great at like problem solving and just like helping people with like complex issues, right? So this was during the years at Wells Fargo. There was a lot of sales pressure. So people would be like opening up accounts for dead people and like all kinds of like trickery was happening.
Yes.
But I didn't really like that stuff, but I loved like actually solving, like somebody comes in with like a complex problem, like somebody messed up somewhere or like they needed some kind of thing. And I would spend a lot of time like working through it and helping them. So the other people in the branch that were actually making their numbers, they're like, oh, this guy, he's terrible at sales, but he's very good at like actually helping people with, that's going to take a lot of time from me where I'm not selling. So that everybody would just dump their problem customers on me. And about 3-4 months of the job, my manager comes to me. He's like, listen, normally we'd fire you immediately because you're just such a horrific salesperson, but everybody really likes you. So I'm going to give you a 3-month notice that like, we're going to fire you, but we're giving you 3 months to just like, because we like you to figure out your next moves. And I was like, oh shit, like this is my first job out of college. My life is ruined. Like I failed, right? And in school I was always getting like good grades and like, so I never really like had like, okay, you failed, right? I'm like, shit, what am I gonna do now, right? And one of my friends was, he was like, hey, oh, you're smart and you like to argue. You should go to law school. And I'm like, lawyers make money and my parents will be proud. Wonderful reasons.
Done. Check.
For going to law school, of course. Yeah, so I got into law school, took on a whole bunch of debt. And within the first like couple months, I'm like, this sucks. And I'm like, but no, like I've failed my first job out of college. I don't want to work with the degree that I got. Now I'm failing in law school. Like, I'm a failure, right? Like, what are my parents going to say? Like, what are my friends going to say? Like, those were the questions in my mind. Not saying that they were the right questions to be asking.
Sure.
I'm like, I'm going to force myself to like this. And there was like a drop-off period. I think like halfway through the first semester, you can drop out and get like a refund of your student loans. I'm like, no, I'm going to force myself. So I, go through the past the point of no return, and I still hate it. I get through the first year, which is like the hardest year of law school, and I'm like, all right, it's nearing the end of the year, and I'm just like more and more miserable, like, and I, for the first time in my life, I asked myself, forget about money. Forget about what your parents think or what your friends will think. What is it that you're interested in? Like, because I have a strong belief that if you find something that you're interested in and you're willing to just devote a lot of time to it because it's interesting to you, you'll find some sort of success, right? And for me, it was always like an intersection between business and tech. Because even in undergrad, I was always interested in tech, but like my business classes were always more interesting to me. So during one of the law school lectures, right, we all had laptops, and I literally Googled tech masters for business majors. And one of the first results was University of Glasgow had a special program. Which is where I wanted to go. I didn't even know I wanted to go there. Oh. So this is a long way of how I ended up in Glasgow. A long story of how I started.
Because where was your law school?
Oh, sorry. My law school was in the Bay Area, in Santa Clara.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Okay.
So sorry. I missed that part.
Easy.
Yeah. Yeah. So anyway, and at that point, it was like 2007, 2008. I was, like I said, miserable in law school, and I was like, okay, you know what? I'm going to go study tech in Scotland. So I found people that graduated from the program, interviewed them, turned out to be a very good program, spent the rest of the remaining law school year applying to the program and getting all the documents, got in, and then had a really interesting dinner with my parents where I'm like, so I'm quitting law school and I'm moving to Scotland to study tech. And my parents were like, what? You're just scared. You're running away from your responsibilities. You're going to be running your whole life. Blah, 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 blah. But I'm one of those people, when I get something in my head, it's very hard for me to get anybody to change my mind. And I'm like, no, I'm going to do this. And my friends were like, wait, so you're leaving Silicon Valley to study tech in Scotland? Like, what the hell is wrong with you, right? But I'm like, I'm just going to do it. And I did that. So I moved, and it was the best thing I've ever done, because I had mentioned to you that like when I graduated from undergrad, I had like no confidence. I just I didn't believe in myself for whatever reason. So I moved to Scotland, and I didn't know anybody, and I have never really been in that situation because I've always been like around my family. Even when we immigrated, you know, it was always like the four of us. My little brother was with us, so we were like a tight little unit. So I never really had to learn how to, you know, be completely on my own. And here I am, new country, didn't know absolutely anybody, didn't know, frankly, how to talk with new people. Like, even in high school and college, when you go to like house parties, I either wouldn't go, or if I went, I'd be one of the people in the corner, like, you know, just like this, like, not knowing how to talk to people.
Yeah, socializing,
like,
yes.
Yeah, I would never have gone to like that event that we went to.
Yes.
Because I just wouldn't know how to behave or how to like talk to people. So, so that was you're just dropped into the deep end, don't know anybody, new country, new place, new city, everything. And one day I was working out, and as I'm working out, I'm thinking to myself, wait a second, I'm working out my body, and like when I first started, I couldn't lift, 100 pounds or whatever. I had to start very small. If you can train your body like that, maybe I can train my mind. Maybe I can give myself little exercises to be like, yeah, I can't maybe walk up to a person right now and start talking to them because that's like lifting like 200 pounds. But maybe I can figure out little like stepping stones to get me comfortable, or like get me the stamina to like start having those conversations. And that's what I did. And the first thing I did was like, okay, I'm going to, like, what's the lowest pressure thing that I can come up with? Probably not talking to girls, because that's
a threat level 10.
Yes. But if I see like a guy with cool shoes, I'd be like, hey man, cool shoes. I'll start there. And I'll get to a point where like saying cool shoes to a guy, easy, right? And that's what I did. Then I'm like, okay, well, then I'm going to start asking them, where did they buy them? Right?
Yeah.
And literally just like that, just like came up with little games for myself to the point where it became less and less and less and less scary to talk and meet with people. And actually one of these like, hey man, cool shoes guys was one of my classmates who's now one of my best friends. He lives in Prague. Like he's a pretty big name in the video games industry. But yeah, just so like that was one of the big like aha moments in my life, is that you can train yourself. Like people can change so like, yeah, but it's all about like structuring like little stepping stones and like going from like, yeah, like I'm afraid to talk to anybody to being like pretty normal socially.
Oh, that hits home for me on such a huge level, because I can see in my own experience. I grew up here in Austin, but I always was with the same pockets of individuals all through, primary education. And I went off to school in California, so 2,000 miles away, and I graduated early. So I was a 17-year-old baby going into this college level program, and I was the youngest person on average by about 4 years. Wow. And most of the people that went to this program, this was something they went to typically after they got a baseline education. And so I just thought, like, I hung this, when I go to this school, then I'm going to find my tribe, I'm going to find my people, like this is when life starts. I got there and I was utterly blindsided by social anxiety, and I had no socializing skills because there were no sorority, fraternity, any of those types of organizations. This was a very strange school. It was pretty much Hogwarts, and it was like, but I didn't have like Gryffindor or like Slytherin. It was just you, the 17-year-old weirdo from Austin. And most of that schooling, I'd say up until the last year, I started to have a little teeny fraction of like, hey, I know how I fit into this social economy. But like there were like the rock star people that were on a fast track to be these like, in the music industry, and people that, I mean, the school I went to was very religious. And so it was like, oh, well, this is for people who are going to go into ministry and they're going to be pastors and whatnot. And I was just over there making weird interpretive art, and like got into teaching English as a foreign language, but just an utter misfit of like socially. I didn't have lateral people. My housemates were such a saving grace, and still I still have a few very close friends from that experience, but it was wild because it was just like flying a nest and fucking face planting and getting eaten by like an anaconda as a snack. Like I ran tons and tons of time then. Like I had just trained for my first marathon when I was still in high school. Wow. So then when I came there, I didn't know how to talk to people, so I just fucking ran. Yeah. I would just do this 10-mile loop and spend all my time alone.
Literally running away.
Literally running away, and then just showing up to my classes. So I think that the moment for me that I started shifting, because I love how you turned the, like, how do I approach somebody into a gamification experience. Yeah. And I think that's something in my life, I was a very shy child, and I also can look back and be like, my parents never socialized me because they aren't socialized. My nickname from my dad between my mother and I is RBW, raised by wolves. Like he just goes to the beat of his own drum. Like, leave him alone, throw him a bone, like whatever. He's amazing, and like that's not his environment. So these skills you're describing of socialization, I love the steps, the actionables, and the comparison of weightlifting, because it is.
Yeah, yeah.
And I even find in this chapter of life, like I know that being in front of people because there's a dime a dozen video producers, production companies, content marketing agencies, like there's no shortage of competition, but I know that my superpower is getting in front of people, and when they can experience a conversation, when they feel how they feel in an interaction with me, that's what does the influence, that's what does the selling, if you will. So it's like, that's the thing that terrifies me the most. So when I started this podcast in 2019, I was terrified at it, and also I knew like this is going to be really an effective thing on so many levels, on the business side, yes, but also just the interpersonal relationships. Yeah. But if I go a good amount of time, just like if I'm spending 6 weeks in heavy post-production editing and I'm just living on my computer, if I'm not making myself go out and go into social interactions like that group that we went to and just a roulette of humans, I very much will atrophy socially and get really in my head and get very panicky. And it is so like a fitness, a social fitness.
Enjoying this sneak peek? This is just a taste of what we offer on our signature show, the Ruby Hour Podcast. Unlock this full 1 to 2 hour episode and dozens of other insightful conversations. Head over to the Ruby Hour Podcast and subscribe now.
Yeah. Well, you also said something I think very key is having fear, but not letting that fear drive your decision making. And what I found in my life, the biggest growth opportunities have been from things I'm afraid of, right? And now I recognize that part of the reason why I'm here is when you first asked me to come, I'm like, no way, it's too scary. But then like I've known, years of doing this now, I know to recognize, okay, what am I afraid of, right? Is it an actual fear I should be afraid of, like physically, you're going to be physically in danger? Probably not, right? So it's not a rational fear. So usually when I recognize that it's not a rational fear, it means that I kind of have to do this because that's where the growth will happen, right? Because if you're just staying in your lane and everything's comfortable, yeah, you can coast forever, but you're not gonna progress, right? You're not gonna change the trajectory, right?
Yeah.
And then getting out of your comfort zone, yeah, I might fail at this. This might suck, right? But maybe it won't suck. Maybe that's some of the, like, again, some of the biggest things in my life came from, okay, I'm afraid, but it's not a rational fear. So let me just go try this. Let me take advantage of this opportunity. Like, was I afraid of moving to Paris? Yeah. Was I afraid of taking a 50% pay cut when I still had 6 figures in student loans? Yes. But I was like, hey, when else am I going to? And let's see what happens from this. And many, many good things happened. So, yeah.
There's so many nuggets in there because, yeah, you can just coast forever when you stay in the complacency of familiarity. And I think that I can look at my own life, my own lifetime, and the people that I grew up with, that they stayed in the same, they went to the same college as all of the people we went to elementary, middle school, high school with. Like, they didn't ever fly the nest. And I think there's a path for everyone. I'm not here to vilify that. I think that the universe busts open when you make those big changes and those big jumps, and especially going to different cultures on a different continent. There's a direct relationship between the terror factor and then the reward factor of it.
One of the best pieces of advice I ever got was actually my boss in Paris, who was much younger than me. He must have been in his late 20s, early 30s. And I was like, I think 35 or 36 at the time. But he was like, I've never chased a network or a career. I've always just tried to be interesting. And he's had all these like interesting life experiences, right?
Okay.
And because he's like, when you're interesting, people will be attracted to that, to your stories, to your experiences. And I was like, that's so true. One thing that I added to that advice is like, be interesting and add value.
100%.
So, and then when you do that, things just kind of work out.
Well, it's like the add value to me translates, and something I want to add into what you've summarized around being intimidated of, should I take this opportunity to come and speak in this platform? The people that are terrified of doing this usually bring the most like epic truth bombs. And it's such, because I think there's a correlation. Like, I love me some introverts. I'm on that cusp between introverts and extroverts. When people are, when they shy away from those being on camera opportunities, often they have so much depth to share, and it's just like the refining of like, oh man, you've thought about this and considered it and contemplated it, versus the show pony part of society is, which I think that we're seeing a good amount of it now with the influencer era, is you have people that perhaps don't completely digest these observations they have or these impulses, and they go right into just, I'm going to go on Facebook Live and just air out my brain. And that's where we get a lot of misinformation, or things that the whole process isn't all the way thought through, or it's short-sighted. And it's such a powerful thing for, let's get the people that are the deep thinkers to come into the shallow end of, yes, this is it's face value at some point. We're just having a conversation. We could say anything. And yet it's like the caliber of individuals. I love, there's a direct correlation for sure. And the other side of that is just the ability to step forward in the face of fear. If it doesn't scare you, then it must not be challenging, or it's, there's not that fire there, that creative potency.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think this is kind of a cliche, but like if you failed, that means you tried something that challenging, took you out of your comfort. So if you don't fail on a regular basis, you should probably ask yourself, are you really pushing as hard as you want to be? If your goal is to like stretch and grow, you're just gonna run into failure automatically, because like you're going way out of your comfort zone,
and you're inherently testing limits. Because I think my friends that I grew up with, just from my family of origin, if you will, that community, I've observed that most of them now, they're spectators. Like they just watch things that I'm up to, and rarely do they actually want to come and interact directly, but they're constantly watching what I'm doing. And I say that in a sense of like they won't ask me for a cup of coffee. And I'm like, I know that you live in the same city. Like, what is this thing of you're here to observe, but not take action of like, oh, like we should hang out again. Like there's access here. I think that's a really, ultimately it's like, are you here to consume, or are you here to create and collaborate and like take ground in how do we make the world, how do we elevate our communities and the people around us, versus I'm just here to collect my paycheck, have me and mine, our needs met, and then like that's the point of it. Like it's a very short-sighted experience.
I think you bring up an interesting point, because what I found is if you wait for people to reach out, most people in your life are not going to reach out. So what I try to do is I try to, like, if there's a relationship that's important to me, I'm gonna make the first step and be like, I'm gonna invite the person to coffee or to a beer or whatever. Like I'm going to New York next week, and I'm gonna see a bunch of people from my industry that they never reached out to me, right? But they're important people in my life. From both a personal and like a networking standpoint. So I reached out to them like, hey, let's grab a coffee, let's grab lunch, whatever. And most people will be like, oh yeah, sure, let's do it, right? Because maybe they haven't thought about you. But because I very often hear people say, well, so-and-so didn't reach out to me or never invites me so I'm not gonna, if they really wanted to see me, they would. Well, and if you don't remind them of yourself, then for sure they won't. So it's that kind of a thing where I think a lot of people have that same thing where like, oh, I have all these people in my life or from my past, they never reach out to me, so I am not going to reach out to them either. And well, if you want to have that relationship, somebody has to take that first step.
Well, and it's like you're playing the victim.
Exactly.
Like, oh, they didn't do it for me. And it's like, so does your life just happen to you? Do you just make excuses and relieve yourself of the accountability of like, yo, you've got fingers, you could text them, you could send them a phone call, like an email. The reciprocation. Have you found... Because now I'm like, ooh, this is a conversation around like just building social resilience, and especially coming from baseline experiences of social anxiety and building that capacity. Because when I met you at that event, like when you said be the most interesting person in the room, but also add value, I've met a dime a dozen people that they think their shit is interesting. They think their life is hot shit. I'm a micro influencer. And it's like, oh, gross. Like, ew, get out of here. Like, don't toot your own horn. Like, it stinks in here now. But it's like the ability to, you may be the most interesting person in the room, but the most interesting person in the room takes interest in others. Like asking the really good conversation, open-ended thoughts. And I immediately noticed in that group environment, you became the most interesting person because you asked wonderful questions and actively were participating in the conversation versus I think a lot of people in that environment, it's just like you just throwing questions at them and they're not bouncing the ball back. And that's something I think is incredibly important, is to be socially interesting and build depth. You have to take an interest in the other people.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's also just learning, is that people like to talk about themselves. So in those situations, sure, I'd love to talk about myself. I actually was just reading the other day that you get a dopamine release when you talk about yourself.
Really?
Which makes sense.
Okay. I wonder evolutionarily, why is that?
I don't, maybe storytelling or something like that. Maybe that's where my mind goes. But the what I find in like those kind of like conversations is like, if the conversation is not flowing, I try to start asking questions and try to get a person to talk about themselves more, and then hopefully that will make them more comfortable. And if they're worth your time, they're gonna start asking questions back. Because maybe some people just don't realize it, or they're uncomfortable. If they never the whole time ask you a single question, then you're like, okay, this person's probably way too into themselves and like probably not worth your time. But to try to get that out of them, you have to ask.
It's almost planting seeds of, what's capable of growing in this soil of relationship. Do things grow? Or when you create, because it also, I can think of tying into, I've been banned from Bumble BFF 3 times, the friend finding side, because they think I'm a club promoter. For the amount of times, you'll appreciate my algorithm of, this is how, when I first moved to Austin, and I did it in Charleston as well, trying to create opportunities for friendships, especially woman to woman. It's like, how do you make friends as a grown-ass adult?
Yeah.
So on the Bumble BFF side, I would, match with, let's say 45 different individuals. I would always do, my first message would be like, actually read what they put on their profile, see the things they care to identify with, make a unique comment about, oh man, I love that you're really big into the Twilight series. I don't know, that's so cool. What are you reading these days?
Yeah.
So a direct correlation of something personal, not just like, hey girl, what's up?
Right.
How was your week? Like, you don't give a shit about that person's week. You don't know them yet.
Yeah.
But then, start that first round. Then I would make 3 variations of an invitation to a centralized event. So I would say, hey, I see that you like dancing. There's a free salsa workshop at this coffee shop on Wednesday nights. It's 2 weeks from now. It's from 6 to 10 p.m. I'm just doing an open invite with a handful of friends from the Bumble BFF side, but also a couple close friends. It's a great time. And always giving there's coffee, booze, or water. Like, it's not just around drinking. I think that's very important for the conscious community environment. But being like, there's something for everyone, and it's a sweet time. And also invite your fellow Bumble BFF matches that maybe you guys have been talking for a while about meeting in person, but you haven't made the first step. Piggyback on my offering, and the more the merrier. So I would send this, little paragraph, 3 versions, because I learned the first round you can't just copy paste because they're like spam, cut off, whatever. But I would invite, say, 45 women to something that's 2 weeks out. I'd send a reminder like 7 days out, and the stats would be like, of 45 people, I would get, say, 25 people that would say, hell yeah, that sounds amazing. I'll invite some friends. Then a week out, they would say, it would turn to like 15 people. So you'd get a good 10 people that would drop. And then about the day of, you'd have 7 to 8 people flake out, no show. Then the people that said they were going to show, there would be about 5 people. Maybe they would bring a friend or 2. So we'd have a group of about 5 to 8 individuals. And that to me was the algorithm from almost 50 people,
Yeah,
that
yeah.
10% was going to actually show up in person. And long story long, the whole point of Bumble BFF, they want you to stay stuck on the technology and never meet in person.
Yeah.
Because then they get to show their investors, look at
Right.
the activity and
Yes.
engagement. If everybody did what it's supposed to do, which is match and meet in the wild, their product would shut down.
Yeah, that's a great point.
No one considers that. And I
Yeah.
remember when I first moved to Austin and I started building my little algorithms because I was really desperate to have friendships, and I'm trying to reach out. I'm trying to, use this digital marketplace we have access to now, like, technology.
Yeah.
And I remember when I first got blocked or shut down because they were like, we have reason to believe you're just a club promoter for whatever location you're suggesting. I tried emailing all their platforms because also they're based here in Austin.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to be like, do you know how psychologically destructive it is for someone who feels incredibly lonely and isolated to make the brave act of inviting people to an offering and then be completely shut down and be told you can't access any of these people, like friendship is not for you, it was like,
Yeah.
It sucked so hard. So I think that ability to try to offer social value to people, it comes down to when it's reciprocated, are other people also sharing the same value? Like,
I think it's so easy these days to say that you're being social by being on apps or on Reddit or chatting on WhatsApp.
yeah,
That we need to actively engage this social muscle of meeting in person, of getting outside, especially in situations where there might be a lot of people that you don't know. So like, yeah, I think so. That's super cool what you were doing with your algorithm and getting people, because I think that's only going to become a more acute problem, because you keep hearing about the loneliness epidemic, right? Like, we're all so connected, but now people are lonelier than ever. Well, how do you fight that? You fight that by getting outside of the house, and it's scary, and it's complicated, and it's messy. But then that's also, like, again, going back to where does the most growth happen is in those situations. And I still struggle with this, right? Like, I missed the last dinner because it was Friday and it was a hard week, and I had to drive 30 minutes or 40 minutes to go there. And I'm like, oh, I'm gonna miss. But then I regretted it afterwards, right? Because I'm like, who knows who I could have met, what kind of interesting story I would have heard.
Well, Oleg, this has been amazing. How can people, if anyone wants to connect with you from hearing your journey, your experience, how can they get in touch with you?
I have my website, olegjoglo.com. Well, my domain.
Okay.
Right now it redirects to my LinkedIn.
Easy.
But maybe by the time this is live, maybe this will encourage me to finally put together a static site.
I love it. Well, perfect. Okay, well, I'll include that in the show notes. Oleg, thank you so much for giving your time, a little escape from your adventurous reality these days. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Shelby. I enjoyed it. Thank you.
Holy cow, you made it to the end. Nice work. If you love this, let us know. The biggest way you can pay it forward is taking the next 45 seconds and writing our show a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Your feedback is the lifeblood of our show. And if you're sick and tired of hiring the one-off photo video production company, the next best social media manager, or frivolously throwing money at marketing just chasing more likes, then it's time for us to have a conversation. We specialize in strategic content campaigns that generate more qualified leads to make your small or mid-sized business more money. Get a full-fledged media department for a fraction of the cost of an in-house creative director. Email heyruby@rubyriotcreatives.com to get started. Until next time, live a life with stories worth telling.